Hi, hello, welcome. I'm your host Emma, and you're listening to the Dead Awake podcast. Now, today we are starting off Spooktober with a topic that has been lingering around our society for literal centuries. And if you couldn't tell by my freaking hat that I have on, it's witches. From whispered village legends to infamous trials, to the way pop culture has turned witches into both villains and heroes, the history of witches is long, full of death, and fascinating. Today we will be tracing back the roots of witchcraft, from ancient folklore and European witch trials, to even how the idea of witches evolved into modern day society and has integrated itself into our movies and just our culture in general, honestly. So let's grab our broomsticks, light a candle, and fly into the chilling story of witches. I have my computer here, like always, so if I'm looking down, that is why. Also, my duck over here, oh my gosh, I totally named this duck and I forgot what I named her. But she's a witch, so we're twins today. The word witch comes from Old English terms wiki or wicca. Wiki is like for feminine, and wicca is more masculine. But over time, it's become witch, which is a now gender neutral term, and usually you think of like women or feminine beings, but witches can be men too. So don't even put them down. But the thought of witches has been around for centuries and almost since the beginning of civilization in itself. It dates back to 2000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, found on their clay tablets that they would write on, and those clay tablets that they found said stuff about like rituals to like ward off evil. And in ancient Egypt, magic was called Heka. And this was like an everyday thing that they did, and even Cleopatra herself used Heka. They would wear amulets to protect them from illness and harm, and they would also use them to bring fortune and fertility, and just to ensure good health overall. These amulets were also very important because they heavily believed in like afterlife. And so with these amulets, it ensured that they would have a good rebirth in the afterlife, if that makes sense. They would also do things like spells and even practice alchemy. And Cleopatra has actually been said to have a part in, I forgot what it's called, but something that you use in alchemy, she invented in a way, I guess, or I don't know. I don't know what history says, but she was like a part of that, I guess. Ancient Greece and Rome were also in similar boats as Egypt, and as we all know, they had many gods and goddesses like Greek mythology or Roman mythology, all that. And many of these gods and goddesses were associated with magic. Hecate or Hecate, I don't know how to say it exactly. I'm gonna say Hecate because that sounds like that's how you would pronounce it. And I looked it up and I think that's how they said it. But she was the goddess of magic, gates between realms, witchcraft, necromancy, and is heavily associated with like the night and the moon. She was also the one who guided souls and spirits between our earthly realm and the underworld realms, or yeah. There's two other minor goddesses, I guess you could call them, but Circe and Medea, they were known as powerful sorceresses in Greek mythology, and they both had a vast knowledge on herbs and potions, and they would use them to either curse men that betrayed them or aid them in whatever they needed. But they were badass. And ancient Romans were actually afraid of this thing, I guess you would call it. I don't know exactly. But they were called strigae, I think. There's a lot of words that I don't know how to pronounce, so forgive me. But stragae were like creature-like, almost cryptids that you would find in like the Appalachian Mountains. At least that's what they remind me of. But they were said to be like giant owls that had human faces and body features, but they had big ass wings. And they were said to drain the life force out of people, but like mostly children. Kind of like how in Hocus Pocus they use the potion to feed off the children so they can stay young. Some people say they were more like vampires and said they like drank people's blood, but it was like 50-50 from what I saw in my research, so I don't know. But for the sake of this episode, they're witches. But overall, in ancient times, they were mostly seen as healers and people with great knowledge of like herbs, potions, and just things that bring good to their societies. Over time, though, people like midwives and herbalists, people that practice these things, were heavily demonized. And that's where like the word or term hag comes from. These types of witches are seen as like ugly and like have black cauldrons with poisonous potions in them. And this became popular in medieval times mostly, but it continued throughout history, and we even see it in like our society and media today. Other witchy archetypes that we see, or were said to be, I guess, are shapeshifters, like kind of like McGonagall from Harry Potter, and also spirit workers, which are known to communicate with the dead and also go on night flights. And this can be seen in our society today with like people like you and I as like mediums and people who can astral project. But no matter what kind of witch you hear about, they will always be tied into nature or the natural world somehow. And they didn't fade over time. They still exist today in our society and have just, over time, things have changed a lot. And we all know that witches are infamous for flying on brooms, and this actually isn't just some made-up story. This comes from like old rituals, and in these practices, they would make hallucinogenic herb ointments that they would call flying ointment, because when they used it, they would have visions of like them flying. They would also do a fertility ritual where they would take long poles or sticks and stick them between their legs and dance around, and that's where flying on brooms comes from. And I'm pretty sure they did that naked, but I'm going to keep it family friendly for now. After Christianity had spread, though, this is when witchy natural practices got demonized, and that brings us into witch hunts. And much like witches themselves, witch hunts have been around for almost equally as long. And they actually still happen today. We just don't hear about it a whole lot because, like, I don't know why we don't hear about them, actually. That's a good question. But these witch hunts mostly happen out of fear of the devil and things like illnesses and famine. And it's always the crazy little things that get you accused of being a witch, like being left-handed or having a mole. Like, oh, you have a mole? You're a witch. It just doesn't make sense, but I digress. In 1487, there was actually a book published called Malleus Maleficarum. I know I butchered that, but that's not even English right there. But it translates to the witch hammer. And this was basically a manual for identifying and prosecuting witches, and they were so invested in getting rid of witches that they made a whole book on it. And that's crazy because the majority of people killed in witch hunts are actually innocent. So, make it make sense. And I would love to do a more in-depth episode about witch hunts and witches, but today we will be just skimming the surface of the Salem Witch Trials because that's the most infamous one that we know about, and I'd love to save the other ones for another time because there's so many. There's so much information about witches and witch hunts, it's like crazy. Between 1692 and 1693, over 200 people were accused and 20 actually executed. And it all started with two young girls by the names of Abigail and Betty, and they started to act possessed, like do things like convulsing, and their whole town, this was Salem when it was first, like, this was back in the day, you know? So they had very Christian, Puritan, religious views, and so the people in this town were like, there's only one person. My camera or my light turned off. Oh no. Okay. Well, my light turned off. But anyways, back to the episode. The people in the town were like, there was only one person that could be doing this, and that's the devil. So their dad / uncle, I'm pretty sure it was Abigail's dad, or Betty's dad, Abigail's uncle. Anyways, he asked the girls who was doing this, and they said Tituba. Tituba? Tituba. Sorry, there's so many names, oh my god, whatever. But Tituba was their family's slave. And so they took her and they were like, yo, what are you doing? Are you messing with these girls with your evil magic? And she was like, actually, the devil came to me and asked me to sign this book with my own blood, and I said no, but I saw other women in the village signing their life away, so you might want to go get them. And so they were like, all right, you're just going to be put in jail. So Tituba was put in jail, and that was a smart move of her, because if she were to have said, what do you mean? I'm not doing anything, then she would have been, she would have been executed. So the town proceeded to go through a whole debacle of accusing other people that they didn't like and whatnot, and in the end, 20 people got executed, and 19 of them were hung, and one of them was stoned to death or crushed to death, and that was because he didn't plea anything. He was like, this is stupid, I'm not pleading at all, and he died. So, but it was crazy because if you said that if you pled guilty, you'd be granted leniency, and if you pled innocent and were found guilty, then you died. So I feel like if someone pleads guilty, wouldn't you want them to leave? It just doesn't make sense. Like, you're worried about illness and famine. If you keep them alive, they're gonna curse you, But I'm glad that they didn't do that. So, but that led to a lot of false confessions, and it was just a whole thing. A lot of mass hysteria, But that eventually ended when the governor, William Phillips, had disbanded the court that was holding these trials and ended it. And so that was back in the day, but now when you first think of witches, our minds go straight to pop culture, books, movies, TV shows, and overall witches have taken over our screens. Especially this time of year. They're really popular. Pop culture has played a huge role in shaping how we see witches today. And what's interesting is that witches in media bounce back and forth between being terrifying villains to empowering icons. For example, the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz has like green skin, pointy hat, flying on a broomstick. Ugly, to say the least. I don't know. Does that mean? She's beautiful. But Yeah. But she is cemented into all of our brains today, and she alone has influenced many Halloween costumes over the past while. But they're not always bad guys, like I said. Think about like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, or what is the new one called? The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or something? I don't know. Either way, one of them's like chill and the other one's like kind of dark and gothic, but either way, it humanizes her. And she's still a witch. And she's chill. She's a good witch. Actually, I haven't seen all of the new one, but yeah. I'm pretty sure she's good. And then we have Harry Potter, who is one of the most influential witches slash wizards in modern day society. Like in 6th grade, I was obsessed with Harry Potter. I went to school with like all my Harry Potter stuff. I dyed my paper. That was bad. That was a bad time. But Harry Potter and all of his friends and Hermione and whatnot, they all prove that witches can be good, except for Voldemort. And, you know, like all of his followers, but you can't have good without bad. So, it just doesn't work. And of course, horror movies today keep witches alive in all of our nightmares. And like movies like, I'm pretty sure it's called The Witch, something like that, I don't know. Or even folklore-based horror stories bring back the darker and mysterious sides of witchcraft, reminding us of the fear that once inspired us. And many of these witches in media have sparked or introduced us to real witchcraft today. Because, believe it or not, witchcraft did not just vanish with the end of the witch hunts. It's alive and thriving in the modern world, and it's in a very different way, as we know. When people talk about modern witchcraft, the first thing that usually comes up is Wicca. And it's considered a neo-pagan religion that blends elements and ancient pagan practices, ceremonial magic, and folklore all into one. And Wiccans typically, not all, honor a god or goddess of some sort. And they celebrate seasonal festivals called Sabbats. I think that's what they called, but that's like Samhain, Yule, Beltane. There's more. I know there is. I have a whole book. I have multiple books on it, but there's more. Those are the ones I know. And they typically follow this rule that basically says, "And it harm none, do what ye will," which is like, if it doesn't harm anyone, do whatever you want, you know. And it's all about living in harmony and nature and respecting people and life and empowering yourself. But not all witchcraft today is Wicca. It's a broad spectrum, and it can be highly personal, honestly. Many people that practice witchcraft today don't follow any sort of thing. Like, they take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that, you know, make it their own. For some people, witchcraft is spiritual practices rooted in nature, energy work, astrology, divination, and for others, it could be like folk magic, herbs, crystals, and rituals, and Reiki, and healing, and all of that. But whatever you want it to be, it will be, you know? And another big part of modern witchcraft is its representation in like our social medias, like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It's given a rise to what we know as like witch talk, and I'm sure if you've been on TikTok, you've probably heard of it. And it's where people share their spells, tarot spreads, or any magical practices that they want to share. They'll share it on there. And it's not just about like spells and rituals and whatnot, it's about empowering yourself. Witches were once put down and executed for stepping outside of social norms, and today they bring that in and they just get in touch with their inner powers, their intuition, and reject the systems that try to control us today. So whether you're a witch practicing in a coven with your friends, or a solitary witch, no matter what you practice, or what other people practice, modern witchcraft is still very much alive to this day and will continue on probably forever, honestly. Unless AI takes over, then we're all just fucked. Except there's people out there that will just, it's a whole nother story, we'll get into that some other day, okay? No one's ready for it. But that is our dive into the history of witches from back in ancient Mesopotamia to present day now. And it's a story filled with fear, power, prosecution, and survival. And like I said, I would love to do more in-depth episodes on witches, witch hunts, whatever. There's so much history that goes into this. There's a whole lot of things I want to do episodes on, but this is really interesting to me because, yeah, if you know me, then you know. But for the sake of Spooktober, I just sprinkled in a little bit of everything. But what do you think? What are your thoughts on witches? Were they truly magical, or was it all just fear and scapegoating that was instilled in them? I would love to hear your comments down below, and don't forget, if you ever have any of your own spooky stories, whether it be true crime, paranormal, or just purely unexplainable, my email is deadawakepodcast@gmail.com, or you can message me on Instagram at deadawakepod. All of that will be down below, so if you need it written out, it's down there for you. But if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow, subscribe, like, comment, 5-star review on whatever platform you're seeing this on. It really helps the podcast grow and reach more spooky souls like you and I. And until next time, let's turn out the lights, get comfy, and stay dead awake.